Hi friends, welcome to today's video. So today we are going to discuss an important topic, that is run loops. We'll also see that how we can use run loop in different modes, and we'll also see the difference in run loop and dispatchqueue.main. Now, run loops are part of fundamental infrastructure associated with threads. A run loop is an event processing loop that you use to schedule work and coordinate the receipt of incoming events. So let's try to understand it in simple terms that whenever a user interacts with an application, the event is added to a event queue, which can then be handled by the application and potentially dispatched to other objects in the application. Now, once the events are handled, then they return control to the main run loop and begin the update cycle, which is responsible for laying out and drawing all kinds of views. Now, with run loop, we also have seen different modes of the run loop. So if you see, we have generally default. We also have other modes like connection, model, event tracking, and common modes. So out of all these five, two are which we use more often. One is the default mode if you don't define any mode, and one is a common mode. Now let's see this run loop implementation through a practical example to understand more that in which scenario we should go with the default mode and in which scenario we should go with the common mode. So let me just build a simple application to demo that how the default mode and common mode can give you different behavior when implementing in a code wise. So just allow me to write some piece of code and then we'll come back. So what I've done, I've just created a variable called timer, and then I have binded that timer with my view model. So now what I will do, I'll just write one function to actually start my timer. So let me just write this function. So create, I'll call it as default timer. Now this timer is a published property, so whenever this timer is going to change, it is going to update to my view. So let me just write a init method here, and inside this I'll just call my create default timer. Okay, now let's build this application. So now what should happen that every second my timer should get called and it should update my text view. Okay, so let's see this. So now you can see that the timer is updating after every second. And while creating this timer, I didn't use any of the word runloop.default or runloop.common anything. So by default, even if you don't write, the timer runs on runloop.default. Okay. Now, if you scroll it down, now what happens? Your timer get stops. So whenever there is a user interaction and your run loop mode is default, then if you see that the timer stops functioning. This might have created a lot of issues for a lot of people. Now what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to add this on run loop. So run loop dot current dot add. Now here what I'm going to do, I'm going to add the timer, and now if you see that here you have to give the more. First thing, I will just give it default, and if you see this time, this timer is not having any change. Like even if I scroll or if I have any sort of user interaction, then the timer will stop. See, I am again scrolling it down and my timer gets stops. Now what I will do, I'll just create one more timer object. I'll call it as create common timer, and now I'll change this method to common. Okay, I'll just copy paste, call it as So let's change this value and let's call this common timer. Okay. Okay, I think the problem is here. I'll just make it as common timer value. Okay. Now my function is ready. So let me just call this function as well. And what is the name of this function? Create common timer. Now in this case, instead of calling it as on default, we are calling it is on common. Okay. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my view and here just copy and paste and I'll call it as RunLoop Common. And I'll bind common timer value. Now let's run this app once more. And this time, if you see, if I'm not doing anything, my both the timer are working in a normal way. Like both the timers are increasing after every second. But now what I will do, I'll interact with it. So let's interact with it. And now what you see that there's a chip. Whenever I'm interacting, one of the timer stops working, but the other timer keeps working. So if you, I'll just what I will do, I'll just keep it like this. So can you see the difference? So whenever the user is interacting, this timer, the timer what we have created with a default mode, that stops working, but with the common mode, it keeps working. So now the question comes that what we should use, whether we should go with always common or whether we should go with the default. Now the thing is that we should not use common until unless that you require something to always go even the user is doing something. Like for example the timer. Like let's say that when you're using a timer in your application, your timer should not be dependent on whether the user is interacting or not. It can depend, it all depends on your business logic. But if let's say that if it is independent of user touch, in that case we should go with the common mode. Okay. Now come to the next part of this video, that is that when we should use run loop versus dispatch queue main. Okay, to understand it more clearly, let me write the code. But before that, now dispatchqueue.main is not something which we are using or which we are hearing for the first time. It's like we are using dispatchqueue.main.async from very long time, even at a time of Objective C and then Swift, not something which is related to Swift UI. Now what is dispatchqueue.main? So dispatchqueue.main is basically a queue that is associated with the main thread. Okay, so the system is responsible for generating this queue which represents a main thread. A dispatch queue executes tasks serially or concurrently on its own associated thread. Now, if you discuss on a high level what is the difference between a run loop and dispatch queue, there is no major difference. The only difference comes is that when you do some task and at the same time if the user is interacting with your view, the run loop can delay the update on your view. For example, let's say that if I'm scrolling this and the same moment I am also downloading an image. So the moment I have just kept it in the scroll position, the image will not update on my view if I'm using runloop.main. But if I'm using a dispatchqueue.main, it doesn't depend whether you are interacting or not interacting. The moment your image is downloaded, it will update on your view. Okay, so it's not just related with downloading of image, it's related with any task that you are performing. So let me write the code and then we'll say it. So if you see here, I've just written a simple function to load image, and I have used here URL session with combine framework, where I'm receiving the data. And this line is something which is very important, and then we'll discuss this line, that is on which or where we are receiving the data. And right now I'm receiving it on dispatchqueue.main, and then this is the place where you're receiving the data. And then after that, I'm just making the is loading as false, and I'll use this is loading to actually show my loading indicator, and image data is actually to bind the image data. So let me go to content view and write the code here for my content view as well. Okay, so I'm done with the view coding also. So I've just taken a group, and I'm just checking that whether the image data is there or not. And if the image data is there, then I'm just loading it into image. And if the loading variable is true, I'm just showing the progress view. Now, from where to call this method that we have written? So I'll just call it from my view model only, and I'll just use it after 5 seconds so that we can see actually, or we can visualize what we have to see the difference. So that's the reason, instead of calling it from on appear, I'm just calling it after 5 seconds. And I'm using this common timer because we have seen that if I use this, then this timer is independent of whether you are interacting with the view or not. Okay, so here I've just put a simple condition that if common timer is equals to 5, then let's call our function, that means load image. I'll just pass the URL here, and this I have taken from Pixel. So okay, so this is done. Now let's run the app and see whether the image is getting loaded or not. Okay, and the timer is started. After 5 seconds my image call will happen, but something got error. Maybe let me check whether my URL is correct or not. Okay, so the URL, I missed the spelling, so let me run it again. So let's wait for 5 seconds again, and now you can see the service call started showing progress indicator, and then it got successful downloaded, and it is showing in my UI. Okay, now what I'm going to do, instead of receiving it on dispatchqueue.main, now let's just change it to runloop.main. Now let's run it again. So let's wait for 5 seconds, and then it's same. It's again it's make the API call and then download the data and showing it on the screen. Then what's the difference? Now to visualize the difference, what I will do this time, again I run with the same configuration, but this time I will interact with the screen. Okay, so what I will do, I will interact with this scroll view. Okay, now if you see, the image call actually started, and the reason is that because I can see my loading indicator. But see, even after 13 seconds or 14 seconds, the image has not updated UI because still I have not left my finger from my mouse. Okay, and the moment I leave my finger, you can see that the image appears on the screen. Okay, this is with runloop.main. But if I change it to dispatchqueue.main and run it again, and let this time see if I keep interacting with the screen whether it creates any difference or it remains as it is. Okay, so let it run, and I will again interact this time as well. So I'm just scrolling it down, so you can see that there is a difference in timer, but this time the image got refreshed. So that's the major difference between the run loop and dispatchqueue.main. So when you're using runloop.main, so the it will basically, what it will do, if the user is interacting with the screen or user is doing any like scrolling, some touching event, in that case the update on the screen will happen with a delay the moment the user stop interacting it. But if you use dispatchqueue.main, then there will not be any delay. So in this case approach, I can just say that dispatchqueue.main will give me more proper result compared to runloop.main. Okay, so whenever you have to do this kind of operation, always I prefer personally always using dispatchqueue.main over runloop. Okay, so hope now you understand that in which scenario you have to go for runloop.main versus dispatchqueue.main and runloop.main versus runloop.default versus runloop.common. So hope you have enjoyed this video, and if you have really liked this video, please don't forget to subscribe the channel. Thank you.